some discrepancy on the LSRPA website that it started at 9:30. We tried to send out a correction on that. So if by chance you join a half an hour late, we certainly apologize for that discrepancy. We'll try to make sure we don't make that same mistake in the future. My name is George Nicholas. I am the co-chair of the SRP training program. I'm also the lead on the development of technical guidance for the site remediation program. And so this is actually my honor to help the Technical and Practicability Technical Guidance Committee put on this training. So first of all, I just wanted to welcome everyone on the web. We have almost 300 people on the webinar, which is pretty substantial, and welcome the people in the room. I just wanted to quickly, before we start the actual technical part of the training today, I just wanted to go over quickly what the how this guidance actually came about and give people who might not be informed or aware of exactly how the technical guidance process works. So, let's bring it back. Just want to give you the technical guidance committees. They're composed of 5 to 7 DEP staff and 7 stakeholders. I believe the TI committee did have 5 and 7. Was that correct, Tom?
A little short on the DEP side.
We did lose one on the DEP side. Occasionally people get reassigned and have to pull off of there, or they leave the department, which has happened in other cases. But we try to keep a balance of 5 DEP staff and 7 stakeholders at the committee level. In addition to that, the topics for the technical guidance committees were actually selected. We had in 2010 for the round 1 technical guidance committees, we had a large meeting where topics were discussed and we whittled them down. We actually had 16 topics at that point, 16 technical guidance committees. A lot of those topics were involved in what was in need of within the LSRP program, what LSRPs and the regulated community felt were topics that were necessary for clarification in order for them to do their job. So it was a cooperative effort. We had quite a large group back then. We developed those committees, and we assigned DEP staff as well as stakeholders to those committees. We also did that again in the summer of 2012. At that point, we started a second round of technical guidance, and we whittled the number of topics down to 6 at that point, understanding that a lot of people have a lot of time or don't have a lot of time, I guess, to participate on the committees. And so we felt that it would be important to identify what we thought were most important and the priorities as far as those committees were concerned. So just to give you an idea, once those committees start, they work in development of the technical guidance. When they get it to the point where everyone on the committee feels that the final draft is something that they can support and is reasonable, we send that out for comment, review and comment to internally to SRP staff. We send that to, well, actually we send it to SRP managers, which is bureau chiefs, assistant directors, directors, the assistant commissioner's office, all the staff within their office. And we also send out an invitation to SRP staff to review the document if they would like. And we ask them to contact their managers to make sure that that is an appropriate work effort for them to do. And we do get a lot of DEP staff commenting on our documents. In addition to that, we send the documents out to all of the stakeholders who are participating on the committees, and we ask them to coordinate a review within their respective constituencies. In that regard, everyone who's on a technical guidance committee has received, all the stakeholders have received a copy of this draft document, have coordinated within their respective constituencies, for example, LSRPA, the Builders Association. Anybody who would be interested in further reviewing the document has a chance to do that through their stakeholder representatives. We also send that out to the Site Remediation Steering Committee, and their job is to look at the document to identify fatal flaws that they feel would prevent the document from being appropriately used in the field. So we do have, and that review and comment period is 6 weeks for every document that we send out. Once the documents come back, the committees are tasked with looking at every comment, incorporating the comments if appropriate, but also creating a comment response document, which they also post on the web with their final document when it's posted. The reason for that is to make sure that people understand that we do look at your comments. We appreciate the time you put into looking at those documents and providing comments that I think make our documents better, and also to make sure that you understand why we perhaps didn't incorporate something into the document, or why we did accept it. The average time period to complete documents is 24 months. Just would like to point out that due to the weather this year, that's probably going to be a protracted schedule. We've had to cancel many meetings within the past 3 months, so hopefully we'll still have good cooperation and progress on the round 2 committees. Also want to point out the final documents are posted on the SRP website under the guidance tab on the left. The address is provided here, but it's very easy to get to. In addition, this webinar is being recorded today and will be posted as an archived webinar, which can be accessed later on. I realize that there is a conflict with a lot of LSRPs. Today there's a LSRP exam prep course being given, and we apologize for that conflict. We'll try to work better to make sure that there's no conflicts in the future. This is a list of tech guidance committees for round 1. I just want to point out there's technical impracticability, number 10. They're getting their document finished, and we certainly appreciate that. The only other outstanding round 1 guidance committee is analytical methods. They actually have their draft documents out, and they're incorporating comments, and hopefully we'll have that completed within the next month, and then we will be looking to provide training on that document as well. This is a list of the round 2 technical guidance committees. I would point out that the last 2, number 7 and 8, were actually added at the request of the regulated community. We had a lot of feedback. The Child Care Center technical guidance was added after we did a training session actually in the public hearing room. And a lot of people felt that there were some uncertainties still existing with the guidance we provided within the training, and so we did develop a committee to create a little bit more comprehensive guidance so that we can at least allow those types of sites to be better handled. In addition to that, number 8 is the catastrophic events. We felt that after the events of Sandy, a lot of our sites had difficulty in responding or being restored back to operating status. So what we wanted to do was think about the ways we can perhaps better plan and respond to catastrophic events. That was just started in 2014 in January, and so we hope that will help our sites to better plan and better respond to major events. So that's it. Right now, just want to introduce Ted Toscas. Ted's going to give us an update on LSRPA activities, and as well as Ted is one of our trainers today. So, Ted?
Thank you, George. Good morning. I'm Ted Toscas. I'm on the LSRPA steering committee. We'll talk a little bit about some training events. The LSRPA has been providing some support and sponsorship to this series of training events. We provide some help with the registration and so forth. Let's see, which one is it? This one? No. This one?
Oh, hit that one again. Hit that bottom one again.
Okay.
It's just, this is it again.
Okay. Of course, I'd like to acknowledge our LSRPA sponsors, without the help of whom we wouldn't be able to do those things. Those of us that got licensed on the first round are coming up shortly on the 3-year anniversary, and according to the rule, we have to have 36 continued education credits over a 3-year period to have our license reauthorized, essentially. These are the requirements for the mix of the subject matter CECs that we have to have: 3 in ethics, 10 in regulatory, 14 technical, and 9 discretionary. This is the rules of how you count CECs. Basically, 1 contact hour of instruction is 1 CEC. There is some credit given for attending conferences, conventions, workshops, places where you can actually learn something, but because of how those are structured, it's not a one-to-one. It's for every hour you're there, you only get a half a credit, and there's some limits for how many credits you can accumulate that way. Oops, sorry. You can also get credit for webinars and online courses, but being that those are sort of opaque, some sort of an exam is required before you will actually get your credits. Also, for those LSRPs who might have a publication or presented at a technical conference, whatever, there can be credit given by the board, but it's not inevitably a one-to-one. This is something that if you think you qualify for, you need to take it up with the board and get their guidance. Some upcoming events. February 27, there is a members-only breakfast. It's this time around. It's in Bordertown. The LSRPA is trying to rotate them geographically, so it's easy for practitioners from different parts of the state to attend. It's kind of like a round table where practitioners get to talk about their experiences, their whatever is ailing them. And it's a members-only event. March 19, there is the ethics class at Montclair State. Remember, you have to have 3 credits of ethics training to get the license renewed. And, of course, the next LSRP exam is March 19. I'm not entirely convinced what the current head count is. Last I've heard was about 40 people, but I'm not sure. So, thank you for showing up today for the training. I thought you all get something out of it. And George?
Yep. Thank you very much, Ted. Next up we have Tom O'Neill, who's going to start off the training today. What I do want to point out, though, is that we do have a large web audience, and so what I would ask is that when the questions time comes up, that everybody wait for the mic. I don't know if any of you have been to the training with me before, but I'm adamant that everyone use a mic so that people on the webinar as well as in the room can hear what the question is and also hear what the stated answer is. So I appreciate your participation and understanding in that. Thank you. Tom?
Thank you, George. And welcome everybody to the training for the technical guidance on technical impracticability for groundwater, and that's what we're here for today. I'm glad we're able to sneak it in between all the weather. Got a little weather coming in a little later on today, so the webinar audience, count yourself lucky you didn't have to come down to Trenton. This is based on our version 1.0 that was published on December 3rd, 2013. Okay. I do want to correct one of the earlier announcements. Some people flagged that the announcement did indicate that there was some tie-in to IECs, or immediate environmental concern timeframes. There aren't. That was a cut and paste error. So don't count on us talking about IEC timeframes. That has not been touched. There's no plans on changing that. So we stand corrected on that. Our perspectives, I am the regulator representative. I also wear another hat. I am the section chief for operation, maintenance, and monitoring of long-term publicly funded site remediation projects. So I spend the public's money to conduct site remediation. So I have a really strong interest in how site remediation projects progress or don't progress, and that's how I got tagged to do the TI committee. Ted is a project manager, consultant, and LSRP, so he provides the private side perspective to our team. And I also want to encourage you all to provide your input, webinar folks and the audience. We need your input to improve our documents and improve this training going forward, so please don't be shy about giving us your feedback either here in this room or after the session in whatever method you feel like providing it. And my little picture there, that is not, it is a winter scene, but that's not snow. That's a form of chromate up in the Meadowlands. Here's our committee. Ted, George outlined the committee process. I really want to take this opportunity to give them a public thank you. As George pointed out, the normal turnaround process is about 24 months. We were well over 3 years. About a year of that was due to no fault of the committee. That had to do with health issues that I was involved with, and those are behind me now. And we were able to get that done. A fair amount of it was the seriousness with which the department took TI, and we had a long period of discussions in-house and review in-house. But the committee worked hard. They were all very active members and stuck with us throughout the entire process. And I also recommend when we do go into these rounds that you join one of these teams. It's a great way to participate with us and get to know us better. We get to know you better. And I find these teams or committees personally rewarding just to produce a guidance document that will be helpful to the environmental community. Here's the outline of what we want to do. We're going to do an overview. We're going to present you a definition of what the committee came up with for technical impracticability. And we'll talk about what it is, what it isn't. We'll go into the TI determination process. How do you figure out when you have a TI condition? And we're going to go into documenting a TI determination. So you figured out you think you have a TI condition. How do you document that? When do you present that to the department? How do you present that to the department? Then we'll break for some questions. And please hold your questions until the question and answer session to help us get through the flow of this, and you might get some answers before the question session answered. The only exception there is we will pile on with jargon and acronyms. Feel free to stop us if you don't understand some jargon or acronyms that may impede your understanding of what we're talking about. That's an exception to the interruption rule. I'm always big on that. On any committee or team I've ever been involved with, we get hung up on our own jargon and acronyms, so slow us down. Yeah, George is pointing out there is a handout for acronyms. You should have that. You can take a look at that. Yeah, it's in the back of the handout. And we also have selected references. We picked some references that tied into these slides that we're presenting today. There are other references, more extensive list of references in the actual guidance document itself. So take a look at that. Then we're going to move into post-TI determination management. And I'm going to say it now. You're going to hear it about a dozen times today. Technical impracticability is not a no-action alternative. And yes, I know that's a double negative, but it's an appropriate one. Just because you've come up with a TI determination doesn't mean you're done. There's always something to do, to manage the remediation and keep it going. So that section will talk about what you're going to do in post-TI determination. And we're going to present a couple of case studies. One will be a early in the process case study. That's one where the TI determination was made prior to the design. And then there will be a more classic one where a system was built and installed and operated, and the operators determined that they were really in a TI condition, and that one Ted will be presenting. Then we'll have another round of questions, and then we'll provide you those resources and our contact information. Okay. Why did we do this? George pointed out we're here to provide you guidance so that you can do your job, and you is the environmental community, specifically the licensed site remediation professionals, consultants, and engineers that work with them, even the regulators, such as myself, who need to work with you so you can have an idea of what we're talking about when we're talking technical impracticability. We're going to get into how to prepare that TI determination for presentation to the department. That timing of the request, I mentioned that already. Basically, it can come in at any time in the process, but there are certain steps that will happen. And we'll talk about the scope of the data and the multiple lines of evidence that you're going to really be presenting to support that TI determination. And again, that post-determination management, I can't stress it enough. Just because you've identified a TI condition and you've come in with a determination and the department is good with that, you're not done. You still have to be protective of human health and the environment, and we'll stress what you need to do to make that happen under a TI. And this training can only cover so much. We're only here with you for a short time today. Look at the guidance document. The guidance document is what we base this training on. If we're going to give you some illustrations that may not be in the document, but go back to the document for the final word, the work of the committee. And there's plenty, as I mentioned, there's plenty more references in there. TI definition. I'll read it in case some of the webinar people can't see it, or if folks in the back of the room can't read it, or if the handout isn't clear enough. Technical impracticability is a condition where remediation of groundwater to the applicable standards is not feasible from an engineering perspective because of the limitations in the currently available groundwater remediation system, engineering methods, or technologies at the time the remedy is being designed. This is a definition that the committee came up with. And the committee spent a lot of time on it. It is the basis for it we jump from the EPA definition in discussion, because this is, as I'll get into in a little bit, is evolved out of the EPA concept of technical impracticability. So we relied heavily on their definition, but it's something the committee really worked through and thought about. I want to stress that it is a technical impracticability determination. It's not strict. There's no real cost consideration, it's not in the definition, and it's also time limited. We don't expect it to last forever. It's time limited. You're basing it on a technical decision. So some of the key concepts at that definition, again, is technical. Cost is a secondary consideration. Once you come up with a technical reason why you can't get the job done, and by that I mean not achieving groundwater quality standards, you can bring in cost as supporting evidence. It's part of the multiple lines of evidence that you can bring into the determination, saying, you know, cost is there, we're going to recognize it, but it's really a technical decision. There's not a technology out there that can bring you to full and final remediation. From the dictionary, impracticability really means impossible. That's the bottom line decision. For comparison, impractical just means unrealistic. That's the real difference between impractical and impracticable. And I will slip over that. Even 3.5 years of doing this, I do have fun with impracticable. So bear with me on that. And the other thing, we left it for groundwater only at this point. We spent a lot of time discussing it as a committee. EPA's is focused largely on groundwater. There's already mechanisms in place to deal with a lot of the soils issues, primarily deed notices. A lot of the scenarios we talked about as a committee or have come to me through numerous phone calls. I've received I don't know how many phone calls from folks already on TI issues. Basically, even if it's, you know, they bring up soils, it still boils down to a groundwater issue largely. Because what they say, well, I have soils, but it's, you know, impact the groundwater levels. I say, groundwater, you're back to groundwater again. So we're open to discussion on soils, and we may revise it down the line, but right now TI is a groundwater issue. Again, my big one. What is this, number 4 or 5 or 6? TI is not a no-action alternative. You still have the regulatory obligation to remediate. TI does not affect that. You're still going to do your RI. You're going to identify your sources, identify the receptors. You're going to protect those receptors. You're going to deal with the source area as best you can. You still have the obligation to remediate. TI doesn't impact that. If you have a mechanism to get to your regulatory standards, you don't have a TI condition. Don't couch it in a TI determination discussion. If you can get the job done per our regulations, per our other guidance, it's not TI. TI is when you can't achieve the standards or you can't complete the remediation per our rules or regulations for technical reasons. And I'll get into this a little bit more. You can submit your TI determination earlier, but eventually it's going to roll itself up into a remedial action permit or a RAP. Because most likely you're dealing with some sort of an engineering control, such as a groundwater pump and treat system, a sparge vent system, some engineering process, or you're doing an institutional control, be it a CEA or a deed notice. So when you do that, once you get through your entire process, your RI, your worked through your work plan, you've proved out your system or proved it doesn't work, you're going to establish your institutional controls or perhaps engineering controls on top of that, then you're going to end up getting yourself a remedial action permit. Just before I move on to this next one, the TI itself doesn't have any regulatory obligations, but all the other obligations that remain in our rules and regulations still apply. Permit requirements, you need to get that permit in the end. Even if you have a TI determination in place, you're still going to be evaluating the effectiveness of that remedial action. You're going to be monitoring it. And when it involves the use of an engineering and institution control, you're going to be doing your biennial certifications. You are going to be certifying their protectiveness. As you'll see later, our threshold criteria are you being protective of human health and the environment? And you're going to be certifying that down the line. And then if you do have an engineering control, you're going to end up with some financial obligations down the line as well. Continuing on, we're not impacting any regulatory timeframes. TI doesn't do that in and of itself. You can submit that TI determination where you think you have your information lined up and you're ready to present it, but it's not going to really impact any of your other timeframes. If you have a timeframe, mandatory or regulatory, you got to hit it. So the TI in and of itself does not have its own timeframes associated with it. If the TI is going to cause problems with your timeframes, there is a form for that, and the form does not indicate, does not have a checkbox specifically for TI, but it does have a line for other. Actually, it has several lines for other on it. So if your timeframe's being impacted and you're trying to bring in the TI as a part of your argument or discussion, use that other line, identify you have a TI, attach all your documentation to prove out your TI, and include that with your extension request. We don't really see a lot of those in our internal discussions, and as a committee. We didn't come up with a lot. There's a possibility that it can cause time issues. In and of itself, by definition, the end game time issue, yeah, that's why you're going to get a TI. You're not going to necessarily achieve standard, so that's where you're going to go. But the upfront mandatory regulatory time frames, we don't see that being a huge impact. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Ted on the next slide to discuss some of the nuts and bolts of identifying and documenting what a TI condition actually is.
Thank you, Tom. So, what are some of the conditions that perhaps will make a TI determination appropriate? We've got to look at a number of things, starting with the basics. What are the hydrogeologic conditions at the site? If you got complex geology, you're in deltaic deposits where you got lobes of material one on top of the other and you cannot connect anything with anything. You got low permeability units. You got fractured bedrock. All these places where, this concept of homogeneous, infinite, and isotropic just doesn't hold true. You got to look at your contaminants, particularly NAPLs and particularly DNAPLs. Just because you may have a NAPL or a DNAPL doesn't mean that it's automatically a TI site, but those are contaminants with difficult properties, with known technological limitations. You also need to look at the remedial technology limitations. The reality is that at some point your technology is no longer good enough. There is, regardless what any vendor says, every technology out there has limits. It's only good up to a certain point, up to a certain condition. At some point you may get to the point where pump and treat may not work, thermal may not work, whatever may not work because of the geology, because of your contaminant types, because of the physical and chemical properties of the contamination. Which is kind of saying the same thing in different words. What affects our ability to attain the remediation standards in case of groundwater, the groundwater quality standards. The types of contaminants, each contaminant has its own set of physical and chemical properties, and in the end, any remediation is beholden to those. Whatever you do, you're bound by the laws of nature. Concentration and quantity of contaminants, the volume of the affected media. Is it a little area? Is it a big area? Is it shallow? Is it deep? Where is it? What does it look like? And yes, finally, you also got to look at cost. What is your actual cost? What is your protected cost? I guess, at some point, it becomes an issue of not only does it not work, but it costs a boatload of money too. So, it's not the driving force, but it's a reality of life. One of the criteria that we use, particularly when we talk about technology limitations, is the fact that we've operated the technology and it has now reached an asymptotic level in its performance. What does asymptotic mean? From a practical standpoint, asymptotic means when the continued operation of the remedial system no longer produces a substantial result. You pump and pump and pump and you get, an ounce of PCE a year. From a mathematical standpoint, for those purists among us, when the curve describing the system performance flattens out and becomes essentially parallel to the time axis. I like to show graphs. So here's a graph of what the asymptotic performance of a system may look like. Again, that may be one of those things that will tip you off that you got to the point where the technology that you have put in the ground simply doesn't work. So, let's see, is there? Yeah. So, let's say this is your typical pump and treat system you put in the ground. The green line may represent the gallons that you're pumping every quarter or whatever time period, and in the beginning the system works nicely, a little up, a little down, but you get a decent recovery, and then at some point, you know, your recoveries drop, and you get a point where no matter what you do to your pumping system, you're kind of flatten out at a certain level. It can be due to any number of hydrologic reasons, whether you've dewatered the formation, what have you. But perhaps more important in the case of a pump and treat case may be what you're getting out of the ground. And you put the system in the ground, and the pounds of contaminant recover on that axis. Well, in the beginning, you have nice amount of contaminant recovered, and you build a graph here that says, you see I'm getting more and more and more out of the ground. But as time goes on, you see that you're getting less and less and less. And as you're doing your sort of cumulative amount of recovery, you realize that you get a point where from quarter to quarter to quarter, your total doesn't really go up. That is really the empirical evidence that your system is now operating at a certain asymptotic concentration level, is operating asymptotically, and perhaps that's one of the things that will tip you off that you may have exhausted the limits of your technology, which comes with a whole bunch of caveats, and Tom will talk about it.
It is a good spot. When you hit that asymptotic curve, there's a lot of reasons for why that may happen. And one of the ways that you can help evaluate what's going on is something called remediation process optimization. That's one of the reasons I'm here, and one of the reasons we included it in the guidance is that poor system performance due to either lack of up-to-date conceptual site model, poor design, poor operational performance is not a basis for a TI determination. If you are, for example, had a design that called for you to be pumping groundwater at 200 gallons a minute with an 80% uptime, and in reality you're pumping 100 gallons a minute at 50% uptime, guess what? Your performance is pretty bad. And one of the ways you can evaluate that as a remediation process optimization method, and that there are plenty of resources for that. I was the ITRC team leader for the remediation process optimization team, so I'm biased towards ITRC, as is George on that. So that's one method you could look at it. EPA has a ton of information on optimization, as does the Army Corps, the Air Force, the Navy, and any number of private institutions. So if you're hitting one of these asymptotic curves that Ted showed, you're going to have to show that it's not poor system effectiveness or poor system performance, and we really recommend that you do an RPO review or an RPO-like review. I could spend all day, and I have literally done so, doing workshops on RPO, so I'm not going to take too much of your time on that now. We have additional guidance on RPO in our guidance document to help you through that process, but it would behoove you to do it or evaluate the RPO process as one of your lines of evidence before you come in for a TI determination if you have had an operating system that is not performing or has come to an asymptotic point. And with that, I'll bring it back over to Ted.
So, all right, it looks like we're going down the path of TI. What are the threshold criteria? What is the minimum that you have to have under your belt before you take the next step? First and foremost is protection of human health and the environment. Is the site being managed in such a way that we're not going to have threats to public health, we're not going to have threats to the environment? perhaps the next thing, and in many ways the most important thing, is to have a good CSM, to have a conceptual site model, have a really good, tightly constrained picture of what is the site, how does it work. There's a guidance document that talks a lot about how you develop a CSM, but basically you got to tie together your site geology, site hydrogeology, your contaminant sources, the contaminant physical and chemical properties, your migration pathways, the receptors that may be at the other end of these migration pathways, and be able to really say, this is what my site looks like, this is how things work. If there is not technology that will let me deal with my contamination and know pretty well what's going to happen at this site, if we cannot say we understand pretty well what's going to go on at the site, we're not ready to come forward and said, well, you know, we got to go down the path of a TI. Again, you know, Tom already talked about multiple lines of evidence. You know, there is no magic bullet. You know, you have your CSM, you have your time, your site picture, you have your different factors. You got to look at all those things for how they come together. So, start looking at the technical factors. First of all, got to look at the remedial alternatives that we're using. We got to look at the site characterization, understand, you know, what's there, where is it, all that good stuff that goes into the CSM. And we've got to look at remedy performance data. We already showed the asymptotic curve. That's just one of the sort of things that you can do, but you know, you just got to take a step back and say, you know, if you have a remedy in place, see how it's performing. If you don't have a remedy in place, but you're trying to determine whether you can even put one in place, trying to understand how such a remedy would perform, you know, based on what you know about the site, based on what you know from the literature, based on what you learn from vendors or from other people. It might sound self-evident, but do we already have enough data to make the determination? I mean, you know, there's a lot of us who have been in this for, you know, 25, 30, 35 years. You can kind of sort of look at a site and say, I don't know that there is a technology that can take care of it. But, yeah, gut feel is good, but, you know, you need the facts. You got to collect the information to make the determination. If the information is not available, well, the next self-evident question is, you know, do we need to gather that information? And yes, if we're trying to understand whether there is a technology, there is a remedy that can be applied to the site, we need to collect information that is appropriate for the question that we're trying to answer.
And there are plenty of resources for you to help you structure that determination. I don't expect you to be able to read all these. They are in your selected references in your handout. They're in a guidance document. But I do want to point out that, and we'll get more into it in the next slide, that this evolved largely out of EPA. EPA's done a lot of work on TI, so they have a fairly structured approach to how to do a technical and practicability determination. We've boiled it down in our guidance. It's part of what we did is the committee, we brought in our own experience to it and looked at the other guidance documents that the site remediation program has developed. So look at the other technical guidance documents as well. TI isn't standalone. There are other guidance documents out there. Look at that. And I just want to stress something that Ted pointed out from the EPA's 2011 clarification of their TI guidance, and it's an important point. And DNAPL contamination is in and of itself should not be the sole basis for considering the use of a TI waiver at any given site. We agree with that statement. So just because you have DNAPL, just because you have deep fracture bedrock doesn't necessarily mean you have a TI condition. You have to, as Ted put it, you got to prove it. It may sound good, but you got to pull that determination together using sound evidence. And as I said, it came largely out of the EPA policy and guidance. Just as a curiosity, have any of you worked on any EPA TI waivers? And that's what they call them, TI waivers. I see one hand, two hands. Okay, that's out of about 100 or so people that are in the room for you, the webinar folks. Has anybody worked on any other state program, technical and practicability equivalents? Same, we've got one, two, again, only a couple of people. So it isn't that common from the folks that are in the room. EPA had published a list of TIs, and I found 6 for the state of New Jersey. They've done, I believe the number was 90 or 91 TIs on 85 sites nationwide. And these sites are the Superfund sites. So the TI waiver process, and that's what EPA calls it, we don't call it waiver because there is a waiver process in DEP, and we don't want to confuse the two. So that's why they call it waiver, we call it determination. But anyway, back to their process, and it is highly CERCLA or Superfund centric. They tie it back into the remedial investigation, making sure that the site is characterized and defined. They look at the design, and I'll present an example of a TI that they did, and it's an EPA case. Prior to finalizing their design, they evaluate the remedial action, how effective that was, and then if they put an engineering control in place, they collect and evaluate that data to go forward and monitor the performance. And again, that's the real difference between the system operational data and whether it's actually effective. I touched on it before. Yeah, you could be pumping a lot of water, but you may not actually be achieving your standards. You may not be actually removing product. You may not be getting at the contaminant mass. So yeah, you could be operationally successful. Design rates of pumping at 90% uptime, that's great, but you're still not doing a job, and you have to evaluate that. So there's a difference between operational performance and system effectiveness. So what they do then is they evaluate whether there's any further remedial potential. Ted touched on that. Are there other technologies out there? Are there other processes out there that can get the job done? Then they go in and modify the cleanup objectives. They do it through the remedial their amendment process or explanation of significant difference. Usually if it's a TI, they're going to do it with a record of decision amendment rather than an explanation of significant difference. Then they're going to document that TI evaluation usually in those documents, and then they may change or remedy. They may move forward with a change. Okay, so where we are now, just to sum up, I would ask you to use the guidance document itself, look at the references that we provided, look at the available other DEP site remediation technical guidance that's out there. We recommend that you come in for a technical consultation if you're considering a technical and practicability determination. a technical consultation is a service. It's not an approval process. We're not going to give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down on it. It's a collaborative process. You present the data and the evidence to us, hopefully ahead of either the telephone call or in-person meeting. In fact, we're going to pretty much insist on that. You present the issues. We have some give and take on those technical points. And we're not going to talk about timeframes, extensions, or any other process issues. It's a technical discussion. You're going to sum that up and hit it back to us with notes. We'll make sure your notes are accurate. And then you can take that for your consideration in preparing your technical and practicability determination. So again, we hope you'll take advantage of the tech consultation process when you're moving forward with a TI determination. So we're going to take a quickie break here and see if you have any questions from the first part of this discussion.
Great, thank you very much, Tom. Again, for the benefit of our webinar audience, please wait for the microphone to get to you. We'll start over in this corner, and then after we take questions from our audience in-house, we'll go to the webinar.
Tom, question for you. Let's make the situation the assumption that the TI is appropriate, and you're going on, you've RPO'd it, and you're 2 biennial certs down the road, and Ted, being the bright guy that he is, has invented a new process that basically will take care of your issue. Is there any obligation to change your remediation strategy at the next biennial cert?
If you're saying if we're already in a TI, so you've already made a TI determination. Yeah, that's the idea. We want you to reevaluate periodically whether there is a new technology or a new process that can achieve the site goals. So yes, we're looking for you to do that evaluation and come back in and modify your system or your technology, and then you're going to come in and modify your remedial action permit if you already have one. And in this scenario, I think you probably already have one in hand, so you're going to modify your permit at the same time. So yes.
We'll take some questions over that side.
Yeah. Can you go through the TI determination process without having the remedy in place?
Yes, you can do it ahead of time. The example I'll come up with, the case study was done prior to remedy implementation. EPA has done it under their process a few times, and we could see you coming up with a technical and practicability determination prior to implementation of an actual remedy.
Bill Wolf, New Jersey Pier. 3 quick questions. The conditions that put you into a TI pathway that you laid out, do you have any assessment as to the prevalence of those conditions? How many sites, how many land area of the state, how much water resource impacted? 2, the evaluation of protectiveness of human health and the environment, is that under current conditions, or does that deal with prospective conditions as to future land use or water resource use? And 3rd, the EPA point with respect to the derivation coming out of the EPA CERCLA program is slightly and highly, I believe, misleading, because that program has a public process, it has a transparent process, it has public notice, public comment, public ability to review the data and the determinations are made by public employees of the EPA, not private sector LSRPs. If you could touch on those 3, I'd appreciate it.
Do you need him to answer the last one first, and then I'll get him to read?
No,
I know, but it's 3.
I got you. I mean, I'm sure you do. The TI determination process does come in through, the LSRP program, and they're going to submit it with documentation to the department, which is a publicly available information. They submit it on forms. They're going to submit it. There is a technical and practicability checkbox on that, so it'll get flagged for review by DEP, and we'll go. That's where I'll leave that. So, the next one back was I'm sorry. Oh, the second question.
The second question was the conditions for determining protectiveness of human health and the environment. Are they current conditions, or do they consider prospective conditions? In other words, if you go down the TI route and you're going to have a future land use that changes the risk analysis, or a future water resource use that changes the risk analysis, and this goes to a policy question. The department has historically classified groundwater as a drinking water source and has granted site-specific relief. This procedure is a 2B site-specific classification under the groundwater standards, and I see this as a huge end run around an existing regulatory structure that came in the Brownfields Act in 1997. So that's the question. And they have, I'm sure you understand.
I do, and I can't answer the policy side of that question, but I can answer the technical side of that. Well, Barry might have an answer to that, but let me do the technical part of it.
Okay.
It goes to what we've been stressing is the conceptual site model, and conceptual site model is a dynamic document, and as site conditions change, and that would include things like land use, you have to show that you remain protective. And that's a technical issue. We already have guidance on how to develop and maintain this conceptual site model, and you build that back into your technical and practicability determination, and we may have a comment on policy.
Okay. Barry Frasco, DEP. To get to your point, Bill, it's all folded into the remedial action permit. So as part of the biennial certification, you have to evaluate, has there been any changes in land use, water use, et cetera, over that period of time since the initial permit was issued. So that would occur on a 2-year cycle. So that's how the future use gets evaluated.
And what they're going to be covering after this little break is going to be a lot more about the remedial action. Okay, now we're back to question one.
Question one.
How many sites, how prevalent are the conditions, acreage?
Do we have any idea?
We don't know. We haven't quantified it. Yeah.
When you issue, I used to work here, and you'd have to do a policy procedure, internal review. You'd have to have a workload analysis. Are you telling me you don't have a universe of cases? Are you going to get hit with 200 cases next month, 20 cases next month? I mean, you don't have any feel for that. You don't have staff assigned. You don't have review procedures in place. How do you know if you have enough staff to review this? See what I'm saying?
I think the easier answer is we definitely don't have enough staff to do most things we're doing within the department. But Barry, do you have anything to add to?
Can I say something?
Yep, you can. Tessa?
When Tom looked around the room and asked how many people have been involved in these determinations, 2 people raised their hand. This has been going. This process this evaluation has been going on in the department over the last 25 years. It's nothing brand new. You know, we've gotten to these places before, and they're very rare. And the department puts people through the paces before they can make these determinations. It's very rare. We don't anticipate after this document comes out that masses of TI requests are going to come in. So that we don't have any acreage or anything like that. But it's been very rare, and we anticipate it staying that way. You know what? We're going to take questions from other people in the audience right now. We gave you 3. Okay, who else?
Additional questions?
Paul has a question.
Anyone?
I guess this question's for Ted. So your very first slide, you had the bullet points on criteria for TI, and included like, you know, maybe fractured bedrock, complex geology, the technology. You don't have appropriate technology for getting it out, and maybe cost. All those bullets seem like those would carry over to soil TI as well. I don't see why they wouldn't. But then you talked about this asymptotic behavior of groundwater concentrations. So is demonstration of that always required for the groundwater TI?
It's not a requirement. You have to look at the preponderance of evidence. if you're going to say, I put in a treatment system and it's not working, well, the sort of the threshold question is, how do you know it's not working? Well, it's not working because I plotted my concentrations and cumulative recoveries over time, and for the past 10 years I haven't recovered anything. So it's not it's one of the tools that one could use, but there is, there's a discussion of it in the guidance, so I thought it would be a good thing to just highlight a little.
Right, so I guess my comment is most of your other points seem like they carry over to soil TI, and that the asymptotic demonstration, that's the one thing, there really isn't an analogous thing you can do for soil. So it seems like that would be the hang-up in applying this to soil.
Well,
I don't know how you would do it, but
well, I suppose you can look at a treatability study for a soil and you say, dose 1 gives me 90%, dose 2 gives me 92, dose 3 gives me 94, dose 10 gives me 94. So you know what? I don't care what I do, I'm not going to get more than 94% reduction. And maybe 94% reduction, it's a nice generous number, so it actually works, but, you can have from a treatability standpoint, you can get a similar type of assessment that shows that, you can only get your soil concentrations down to something, and I don't care what you do from there on out, they're not going to come out. So perhaps that's another thing that that's the sort of logic that you got to think about when you're looking at it, even for soil.
okay. Just one other quick question here. So I don't know much about TI actually, but somehow, if you're in an urban area, it's just everything's covered with buildings and parking lots, and it's hard just to get at the media at all. Is that a factor that's considered when you're looking at TI?
Well, the answer is maybe. You could possibly go under a building. You can do an angled boring, for example. What you got to look at, and we're going to talk about it after the break, is potential damage to infrastructure. Yeah, you can go under a building, but are you going to do something that would cause settlement? You can go under a roadway, but doesn't mean that you got to close down 4 lanes of Route 1 for 2 years. You got to look at it on a case by case.
Okay, we're going to take a couple questions from the web. First one is from Roger Ferguson, and of course Roger always asks questions that are uncomplicated and short. It says operational metal. Is there more to that? There we go. It says, for a site with historic fill and operational metal impacts in groundwater, long-term pumping has reached asymptotic levels. In the department's review of the proposal to terminate the pumping system, submitted prior to this guidance being finalized, submitted and continued long-term monitoring comments have been provided which have disregarded the asymptotic response of the system. In the use of the U.S. EPA process, optimization guidance mandatory, I guess, is mandatory in determining that the TI conditions exist. That's a question. Did you guys understand that? Because I didn't.
I understand the bottom part. There's nothing mandatory. Our guidance is just that, it's guidance. We don't require you to do anything. We're simply creating a framework or a structure for you to use in formulating your TI determination, and hopefully doing it in a uniform way so that we can evaluate them here when they come in. So
okay,
no,
reading that again, I guess you're talking about the optimization part, whether the optimization process is mandatory in the determination.
No. Well, no, not using the EPA optimization guidance. Optimization is recommended, as is everything in the document. It is nothing regulatorily required. We touch on other issues that are required, such as doing your site definition and your RI and all the rest.
Can't quite hear you.
But it's not required, but it is
highly suggested, right? Okay, let's take another one. It's from Robin Blackstone. Not sure. Okay, I guess you lost your sound. Not a technical question. We'll move on. Another one from Roger. For a site with historic, we just saw that one. Yeah. Another one is for Roger, I'm sorry. I think that's very close to the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. Can you go down a little bit, Joe? There's from Russ Trube. Please address the mechanisms for submitting the TI determination and if eventual NJDEP approval is mandated by regulations.
We'll get into that in the second half of the presentation, and approval other than through the remedial action permit process is not mandatory.
Okay, we'll take one quick one from Scott Laird. How many TI determinations besides EPA's 6 Superfund TIs in New Jersey has DEP ever accepted?
We have not accepted a TI determination at this point. We haven't had a formal submittal to us on a TI as yet.
Right, I guess that almost goes back to one of Bill's questions. We really haven't had a formal process. We've had sites that have had this issue for almost 25 years now, and we really have not at least provided guidance on how to accomplish that.
I did sit down in one technical consultation so far between the time it was published and now.
Okay, one from Marabella David. Can a PRP make a TI submittal without LSRP support? That's a good question. Do we need an LSRP to submit that?
Most of the forms that you'll be using to identify a TI determination are submitted by the LSRP. That's all I can really go with on that.
But also, an LSRP, based on their obligation to protect human health and the environment, I would think that in handling a site, they're required, first of all, to handle a site. So a TI determination with all the required information that we're talking about within this presentation, I would hope and certainly think that LSRPs would be involved in that process.
Yes, I mean, they're the ones that are submitting the forms, that are signing the forms, and they're, as part of that process, certifying that, they will be protective options.
Actually, Tessie had a good point, though. In the tech consults, I think anyone can come in for those, but typically LSRPs are mandated to handle the sites, hazardous waste sites in New Jersey for most of the sites that we're talking about. Let's take one more, and then we're going to move on with the presentation. From Jennifer Kruger. Does the department intend for a TI to be used to replace the situation of a groundwater remedy with non-decreasing levels of contamination under a natural attenuation remedial action permit, assuming all other conditions for non-decreasing levels are met?
No, the TI doesn't replace existing rules or other guidance. It's just it's an additional tool that you can use. But if you have another process that's already in place, we're not replacing it.
I think you also said it's not a remedy, correct? Natural attenuation is a remedy that requires monitoring.
Right. If you have a remedy that is, a departmental approved remedy, you don't have a TI situation. So you don't submit it as a TI.
Okay. All right. Just to make sure that we are staying on time, we're going to restart the presentation again. However, we will be here afterwards to continue answering questions. So, you guys want to continue?
Okay, we've got to try to pick up the step a little because I think we're running behind. So, how do we go about assessing whether a proposed remedial action is technically impracticable? First things first, groundwater quality standards, groundwater remediation standards still apply. There's no relief from that. That's our yardstick. Okay. Then the next thing we've got to understand is what is the space, how big is the area that we're asking for TI. And as we said before, we got to have a good CSM, and it has to be an up-to-date CSM. And if the process of the analysis, etc., conditions change, the CSM needs to be updated. You cannot make a determination on a CSM that might have been good 5 years ago, but it's not good now because the town decided to sink in 2 production wells next to your site. You got to have a good CSM, and it has to be a current CSM. One thing we have to also think about in evaluating whether a remedy is impracticable or not is the potential damage that a remedy could do on receptors or on infrastructure. as we were talking with Paul before. And I guess, ultimately you got to look at the remedy itself. You got to look at the data that you have, and you have to have the right kind of data on which to base your determination. First of all, you got to know your sources, and they must have been addressed one way or the other, whether it's treatment, removal, whatever. If you got sources that haven't been addressed and continue to feed your plume, doesn't make a whole lot of sense to say, I can't deal with it. If there is a treatment system in place, look at the performance data of the treatment, the performance data of the remedy in a more generic sort of fashion. Look at the time that your current or your proposed remedy would take to attain the applicable standards. Is it a year, 10 years, 100 years, 500 years? What is it? You need to do some sort of a side-by-side comparison. Well, pump and treat is not going to achieve the groundwater quality standards in 200 years. Okay, well, is there another remedy that may be able to achieve groundwater quality standards in 10 years? So, as designers, we got to do our homework. We just can't say, well, I tried this and it doesn't work, sorry. If there isn't a remedy in the ground already that gives us empirical data, then we got to go collect at least some data from a bench and pilot scale test so that we can make some intelligent statements and some intelligent choices. The point here is that as LSRPs and as the remediating party, we got to do our homework and lay out the background case for why we think that there is no remedy that can get us there. And the things that are up on the slide are the elements, and probably not all the elements that go into the analysis and the rationale why things would not work. And yes, even though it may not be the primary driver, you got to, at the end, you got to look at cost, because the reality is you cannot do anything without money. And you got to look at what is the capital cost, construction and O&M, and that will give you a fair sense of how much money does this remedy is going to cost, especially if you think that you're going to spend this money and not get anything for it. And sort of the final catch-all, yeah, we can do all the things that are in the last couple of slides, look at cost, and we're all professionals one way or the other, whether we're LSRPs or RPs or whatever. What other technical information can we bring to the table that really shows that, in fact, there is no remedy that will get us where we need to go? Tom?
We'll take 1 minute to jump back here. I threw this picture in here just for illustration purposes. This is a publicly funded site cleanup of a gas station. This is not a fence. This is pipelines going into a header system that's under construction for a combination of sparge, vent, and groundwater recovery system. We built this one and have operated it for approximately 8 years at this point, and we spent about $1.75 million to date on this gas station cleanup. Did a full RI, identified all the receptors. We have a CEA in place. And we recently did a remediation process optimization study, and I want to mention that because it's not necessarily you know, an open and shut thing that you're going to go for a TI determination. You may do that RPO and find another way to, you know, get the job done, and that's what we did here. We hit that asymptotic process. We documented that. The RPO reviewer came in and said, you know, you're done with the active remediation. We've shut the system down. We've gone from something under $200,000 a year in operational cost to about $50,000 a year in monitoring. This year, we're going to probably drop that down to about $10,000 to $20,000 a year in monitoring. We haven't demobilized the system yet because we all know about rebound. Rebound is when you shut a system off and the levels come popping back up again. We have not seen that here because this system was very effective in doing its job and removing the source area. So, you know, it's an illustration of you may be able to get there without the TI, but there are steps to get to your TI. But if you do want to go to the TI, here's where you come into the department. You can submit it with your remedial action report. There is a checkbox on there already. It says TI determination. If you want to go, if you've already come up with your TI determination, your evaluation that Ted's been talking about and I've been talking about, you want to come in and say, hey, we have TI conditions, check that box, attach your information. That will flag it to us. We know you have a TI in with us. It will be looked at. So the other point could be a remedial action work plan. Again, there already is a checkbox for a TI determination on that form. It will flag it to us. Same idea. Give us all your backup information, how you came up with a TI determination. The checkbox is a flag. We will take a look at it. And something that had been confusing, and I know we're repeating ourselves, and we're not doing it because we're crazy. We're doing it because it's a teaching technique, and we're doing it on purpose. We are repeating ourselves. We'll acknowledge we're repeating ourselves, and one of the ways we're repeating it is you're likely to end up with a CEA. And we acknowledge that a CEA is likely to be established well before the remedial action permit is actually issued. It's likely to be done after your remedial investigation is done and you define the plume areally and at depth. So that's usually well before you get your remedial action permit. So you're going to get that. And another area of repetition, and again it's on purpose, we recommend the technical consultation. And if you're going to end up with a remedial action permit because you have an engineering control or an institutional control, we recommend that you ask that Bureau of Remedial Action permitting be included in that tech consultation. Forms, either you have the TI determination in hand already, that you've already made the argument that you have one. Eventually, you're going to come in for a remedial action permit. The permit form already has a section for monitoring, maintenance, and evaluation. That's section G. Please include the TI information in answer to question 2 on that remedial action permit application form. And then you're going to discuss it in your subsequent biennial certifications. The biennial certifications are there to show us that you're evaluating the site and the site remains protective of human health and the environment. It's a key part of our entire process, and it's especially important if you have a TI in place. There will be groundwater monitoring. This is a groundwater TI process. So you're going to have to identify what you're going to be doing in the way of monitoring. You're going to include the monitoring in the groundwater monitoring schedule, the groundwater monitoring plan spreadsheet. You all should know what that is. If you don't, go to our forms page, find it, take a look at it. It's got the form, it's got the guidance, and it's got to come in. you know, with any remedial action permit that involves groundwater, especially important again for a TI determination process. The department will then take that and incorporate it into the permit, and that permit for the long haul will be issued, including the conditions that you've identified for the TI determination monitoring. Again, it's not a permanent groundwater remedy. You have identified a site where there's no technical way to complete the remediation. There's no technology out there that's going to get the job done. There's no process out there. There's no chemical process. There's no, we're not going to achieve groundwater quality standards, you know, in some time frame that you're going to tell us. And time frames are varied by person. It's site specific. You know, some sites time frames mean one thing, and others, I mean, we were kicking around a case study where the evaluation came in with a 236-year timeline. For some people that may work. It doesn't work for a lot of us. So, you know, that could be part of your multiple lines of evaluation. But during your TI, you are going to be reevaluating whether new technology has arisen. I know I've been doing this work for 32 years. Things have changed considerably over that time, and there will be changes in the future, and we expect you to evaluate that as part of your TI process. You are going to be certifying under the biennial certification process, and you being the licensed site remediation professionals. And you also have to look at the standards. Standards change. That's part of the process too. You know, see whether there has been a significant change. I'm sure when we make those changes or EPA makes those changes, you get lots of guidance on that. Include that as part of your evaluations when you're doing your work. Post-determination management. We recommend, and it's not a requirement, guidance has no requirements in it, it's a recommendation that you reevaluate it every 5 years. We think that's a good time frame. You know, the committee, we kicked around a variety of time frames. 5 years seems to be a good look, and I think that's one of the reasons EPA chose the 5-year review process for their Superfund program. It also kind of ties in with our biennial certification process, which are every 2 years. So you can do your evaluation in year 5, and you can present it with your biennial certification in year 6. That might be a way to go. You can come in with that evaluation at any time when you think you have the new solution. If you have a way you think you can get the job done with a new technology, or we've issued new policy, or not policy, rules or regulations that now allow you to get out of TI and into a regulatory method, come in when you have it. You know, don't wait. There are times when we will come back and ask you for information. We hope you come in ahead of time voluntarily and let us know things have changed. And those are the biggies. The permittee fails to comply with the remedial action permit. If that happens, we need to know about it from you ASAP, as soon as it happens. There's no real excuse for not hearing about it from you first. We don't want to have to find it. The TI determination is found to be incorrect through fraud, material misrepresentation, and failure to provide material information. Be thorough and complete. That'll cover you on that. And again, time is part of that. If things change, update your TI determination. Let us know something has changed, and you're going to resubmit. And as we keep hammering, this conceptual site model is a dynamic document. It changes. So you need to look at it. You need to look at, like Ted said, somebody may have installed wells near your site. Hopefully, that's been caught through the water permitting process and the well installation, and they've CEAs there. The water folks will say, hey, you put to the permittee for the well will identify you want to put a well in a CEA, and the issue will come up at that point. But just in case, you guys need to know that's happening and make changes to your CSM and subsequently to your TI determination, perhaps, if the conditions warrant. And if you do, don't forget to come in to modify your permit. More on the post-TI determination. You have to collect the data. You can't forensically go back and do it. I try and do that with my publicly funded work. It's hard, long-term, and expensive to try and have somebody come back and look at 10 years worth of data, evaluate it in real time, keep it up to date, and it'll make your life so much easier when you're collecting your performance data. We've moved to that, and our life is much easier. I can certify to that. You're going to review your monitoring program on a regular basis. Same thing. You don't want to go back at the end of that, end of that review period and be stuck looking at a huge pile of data. Do it real time and keep it up to date. Same thing with the tracking of the contaminant and concentration trends. That way you'll know when things are going good or they're going bad. That's something that your operations people should be telling you anyway. So that's something you need to know and report on when you're updating your TI determination. And again, I've talked about it before, effectiveness versus performance. Yep, your system's uptime is, like I said, 90% instead of 80%. You feel you're good, but it's not really recovering what you thought you were going to be recovered. So effectiveness is good, performance is bad. We have a disconnect. You need to evaluate that and report it. Yeah. Okay.
Hello. The webinar is scheduled up until 10:30. What we're going to do, we're not 100% sure whether it will keep going or it will cut off. If it cuts off, we'll set up another webinar and send you the links. If it cuts off, we'll take a 5-minute break here for the webinar people to catch up, but we're hoping it continues. All right, that's it.
Okay. Again, termination of a TI. This is a temporary thing. We hope it will be a temporary situation that you've come up with a TI and made that determination. What may happen? As I said, standards may change. You may meet it through achieving your goal through the remedial action, or the standards change. There could be two angles on that. You found new technology, implemented it, and achieved the goals for the site. And site conditions can change. You may fall into a regulatory process like monitored natural attenuation, and you no longer need that TI because you're now in an attenuation process or some other process that has been developed by the department. When that happens, don't forget to go back and terminate the remedial action permit or modify it depending on what the situation is. Okay, we're going to jump into 2 case studies. As I indicated in the intro, there's two case studies. One is a case study where the technical impracticability was determined early in the process, the remedial action, before remedial action implementation. And I'll do that one, and Ted will pick up with one that's a more classic one where they have a system in place and found they had a TI determination after a system was installed. Okay. Since we don't have any in-house yet, I'm using an EPA one. This is a pre-construction case. It came straight out of that EPA report that's referenced in our document. One of the 6 I found. It's a North Jersey site, fractured bedrock. It's got Dean apples, PAHs and benzene. It was in a residential and adjacent to and overlapping a central business district. Covered over close to 120 acres of property. The EPA was the lead on this. That's why it's called the EPA lead, using Superfund monies to do the cleanup. They went in and did the full RI. They evaluated their options and determined that they were going to have to go for a TI waiver. Again, waiver is their term, not ours. We would call it a TI determination in our process. They identified the source areas. They attenuated them as best they could. They ended up having to take out a lot of houses. We had a question on whether demolition is in there. Yeah, it happens. This one had a lot of home demolition. And in the end, they determined their remedy would have no long-term impact on human or ecological receptors. They did a lot of digging. To save yourself the question, their remedy cost about $196 million. So they dug at depth. These are where homes used to be, this picture, and they went deep. They went for a source area as deep as they could. The basis for their technical impracticability was DNAPL, persistent and fractured bedrock. Their own guidance, as I indicated before, said that's not a presumptive TI, but it can be a reason for one. And they made the determination for themselves. They used the term themselves, standards could not be met for the foreseeable future. But it doesn't mean that they did the TI and a walk-away. They did this huge source area removal, put deed notices on the property, established a CEA, and tried to limit their impact to the rest of the neighborhood and the central business district. Again, their post-TI management is establishing deed notices. Most of them finalized. They're not all quite done yet. When they get them done, they turn them over to me, my unit. Hopefully, when we get the final deed notices, we can turn the properties over and deal with deed notices down the line. The CEA has been established. It's on the books. It's public. It's there for people to see. And the EPA conducts a 5-year review process. They will evaluate the protectiveness of the cleanup and look at future remediation, see if something has come up to allow for a more complete remediation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ted. Oops, I went too far for his version.
Very good, yeah. Thanks. All right, so this is more of a post-TI determination. It's a post-RA implementation, rather. It's a case we're still working on. We don't have a TI determination yet. There's still some work that needs to be done, but I thought that this was a good example to show the sort of questions and the sort of thought process that needs to go into a project when we think that TI may be an appropriate site management option. So this is the site in central north urban Piedmont area. It's a commercial land use type of setting. It's a state highway. There's commercial properties on either side. Some lots are occupied by buildings. Some are empty. What people do in these buildings vary. Some are your typical office use. Others may be light warehousing type processes, and then somewhere off beyond the map here, you get into residential. This is a former chemical production site. I already said urban Piedmont, so that should have kind of set the geologic picture for many of you. We have a little bit of historic fill. And then underneath that we have the Newark Basin red beds. The main water-bearing zone is really in the bedrock, and as you would expect, flow occurs mostly in bedding parallel fractures. We have done a fair amount of work at the site. We've done some hydraulic testing. We've done some in situ treatment. We know that it's a very poorly yielding formation. It may be fractured. It may have groundwater and things may be moving, but yield is an issue. Contaminants of concern are mostly non-chlorinated SVOCs, although we had at least one area of concern that we had some chlorinated VOCs. The site has been, the plume has been delineated to be on site. Through the PA-SIRI process, the source areas have been identified and they were excavated and removed, so there are no more sources. There have been some attempt at active remediation. It said there was a chlorinated AOC. There was a ZVI injection program that addressed that. There was some attempted ESCO work to address the non-chlorinated. And for the most part, we got good results. But then, we got the plume going under the building from one end of the site to the other, and for the portion of the plume that was under the building coming out of the other side of the building, we said, well, can't get to it. M&A is probably a good way to go. Looking at our data over time, we see that the concentrations have pretty much plateaued at some point above groundwater quality standards, and M&A is just not working here. We were looking at all the usual things that you look at M&A, and we think we understand what's going on, and I think that probably one of the things that is happening, and it's tipping the scales here, that we're having some issues with back diffusion from the bedrock back into the formation.
Hey, Ted, just quick, could you just say what ZBI and ISCO is? I know what they are, but some people may
Zero
not.
valent iron, which is ground up iron that you use for in situ treatment of chlorinated compounds, and ISCO stands for in situ chemical oxidation, which would be a good way to address both chlorinated and non-chlorinated compounds. Now, at the site, there are no ecological receptors. The plume has been delineated and has been known to be contained on the site. Oops, sorry, I forgot to change my page. So there are no ecological receptors. We looked at vapor intrusion on-site and off-site. There are no VI impacts, and also at some point during building renovation, some things were done that kind of provided an additional layer of insurance. Like I said, in the portions of the site away from the building, we tried ZVI and ISCO injections. The chemistry worked great. Propagation was for the birds. We've done geophysical logging down the holes. We've done lots of things. We are about as convinced as we're ever going to be that fracture systems at the site are really poorly developed. Like I said, yield is an issue. So now we're stuck with this portion of the plume that is under the building. The building is there to stay. We cannot take it out. And we cannot kick the people out for, 3 months, 6 months, a year to go in and drill through the basement and drill through the slab and put a delivery system, for example, into the subsurface. So we've done both an FS, paper sort of exercise of what are our remedy options here, as well as talk to vendors and said, hey, what can we do about this? So some of the things that, obviously we looked at a whole bunch of things. I just picked a couple that I thought were interesting. So, well, how about rock fracturing? If yield is such an issue, we can get somebody for a couple of $1 million can do some rock fracturing. Basically, my engineers and the owner's engineers threatened bodily damage if I ever tried to do that at the site, because they were really concerned that this building is about 80 years old. There is some weird things with bedrock weathering patterns. They're concerned that if we go in and start fracturing, bad things may happen to the building. I said, all right, fine. How about something else, like maybe try to put some wells, around the building, do some thermal treatment, put some SVE wells, try to capture whatever volatilizes. We're having second thoughts about that, because this whole issue of the connectivity of the fracture systems and so on, I am not entirely convinced that I'm not going to create a worse problem by improper capture of vapors if I go down that path. And the reality is that none of these things comes cheap. I mean, to go talk to a vendor about fracturing, I think they threw a number like $2 million, and it's, and it can damage my building. So I'm basically, it's actually not so much me, but my colleague was dealing with this, but I'm faced with an uncertain efficacy of a remedy, the potential for damage, the potential to create worse impacts to on-site receptors than what I already have. So that sets, in my mind, the framework for, what are some of the questions that I got to chase to the ground. What do I need to look at, and how do I need to think about things, so that if I'm going to take this process to the end, I can really say, this is a TI, it's going to have to be managed as TI, in being able to come up with a recommendation that, I can live with, my company can live with, my colleagues can live with, and the receptors can live with. Tom?
Okay, we're in the home stretch here. Do want to hit some key concepts. Again, TI is not a no-action alternative. As you've heard, you're going to do plenty of work, both in coming up with a TI determination and then after the fact. If you have a TI determination that moves forward, you're going to have to manage it and reevaluate it, and hopefully in the long term come up with a proper solution for the site rather than being stuck in the TI mode long term. TIs are limited both in time and area. Don't try and overreach. Limit your TI determination to that part of the site where you can't resolve the situation. Don't try and give us the entire plume or a source area and the entire plume when you know darn well you can get that source area cleaned up, because we'll call you on it. It can be made at any point in the determination if you're doing it in your remedy selection and for sure you've come up with your evaluation, you've established value, come up with your data, you've even run bench scale studies to show that it's not going to work, you've done field studies to say that propagation, the spread of the the chemicals in the soil is not going to happen. You've hit the various points we recommend in the guidance, then you can come with your TI determination. And if you're going to do it and you're going to end up with a CEA engineering control or even a deed notice, you're going to need, in the long haul, you're going to need a remedial action permit. So include that TI determination information with that permit application process. Don't forget to check that box on those forms. It'll be there. It's pretty obvious. And if you have done it earlier in the process and you're coming in for that remedial action permit later on, note that, you did submit it with your remedial action work plan earlier on. Note whether you've made any changes from that original determination to now when you're coming in for a remedial action permit. And tell us what those changes are so we don't have to hunt for them. So with that, this is in your attachment. These are the acronyms that were in our guidance document. Hopefully most of the ones we used here in our presentation today. More. They're all in the presentation. We picked some selected references. There's plenty more references in the document. I recommend looking at them. Look at our guidance document, look at the other site remediation technical guidance documents, and then start looking at our references before you start giving me a call and asking me about TI. And it goes on and on, so we have lots of references. So we'll start the second question and answer session.
Great. Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you, Ted. We'll take first questions from the audience, and then we'll take some from the web.
Thank you. Is this on? Hello?
Yep. You're good.
I have the question about TI. It seems pretty, well, relatively clear where you apply it to physical remedial actions and inadequacy or impracticability of those to address your problem. My question is, specifically, are there other applications for TI? And just real brief detail is a groundwater impact area with 3 different sources that happened for 40 years, and there were 8 non-contact cooling water wells in the unit pulling the plumes every which way, and they cannot be distinguished. Is there an application for TI in that case?
As we're trying to get across, there's a lot you have to go through in order to try and make the case for TI, and I don't want to make a comment on a specific example like that, but it sounds complex. Work your way through their guidance and come up with an argument.
Can I say something? Because you can't distinguish between the sources of the plume doesn't relieve anybody of liability or responsibility. They better get together and figure it out together, is, I think, the position that the department would take on that.
There's also a commingled plume technical guidance committee that's working on trying to provide some tools and ways to approach commingled plumes which have multiple sources, multiple RPs.
And I'll repeat it one more time. TI does not relieve your obligation to conduct a remedial action. I mean, that is the absolute bottom line. We're providing a way where you can explain that it's technically infeasible to go a certain route, but it doesn't relieve your obligation.
Okay.
Any question?
Can we ask one at a time? We can. Good.
For Bill Wolf, New Jersey Pier, 4 quick questions. One, what's the statutory basis for this initiative? And
No, wait, one at a time.
all right, I'm gonna go. That should be easy.
It's guidance, and we came up with it as part of the process. There is no statutory section that says technical impracticability. We do not have
Second
that.
question, are you aware of the fact that Governor Christie signed a law in January 2012 banning guidance and requiring the department to go through rulemaking for the terms to be enforceable, and that's PL 2011, Chapter 215?
Yeah, Bill, we're actually very aware of that. We've gone through that discussion internally more than you could possibly imagine. But there is a public process involved with stakeholders. We can discuss that later. It's probably not the venue to discuss that, but that has been gone through with the department extensively. We'd be glad to discuss that afterwards if you'd like to.
Just two, not a question, just a comment. Then on the public process, there was no public involvement, no academic involvement, no environmental community involvement in the development of the selection of topics or the work groups that were put together on this, and there's very little transparency and public involvement in the implementation So I have a big problem with that in concept. And the
Bill, just let me, that's a great question. As a matter of fact, I see that as a deficiency within this process. However, I would also point out that those environmental groups were invited to be part of the process. The listservs went out, emails went out to them. We have had no response. But
That's not
if there's any way we
accurate.
can get them involved, I'd love to talk
Talk
to you
to
about
George
that.
Schlosser. He was here. I was asked to leave the process, okay? And probably a lot of people were here when that episode went down as well. The
Well,
last
they
point-
were
last point-
invited. I haven't heard anything, but let's not discuss that
Okay.
because that's not the venue
Well,
for this right now.
last point is that the department's role, I think, is misconstrued here. It's a service function, it's collaborative, and determinations are basically in the LSRP camp. That's fine for the purposes of the LSRP program, but groundwater is a public resource, it's regulatory, and the department's role is adversarial and regulatory, not cooperative, collaborative. And I just think that this encroaches into groundwater in a way that is not appropriate.
Thank you. We'll take that into consideration. Appreciate that. Barry, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, just a follow-up relative to the guidance document question. In the Site Remediation Reform Act, there is a provision in that statute that does allow for the department to prepare with stakeholder input technical guidance documents relative to site remediation issues.
Okay. Other questions in the room? Because we'll take it from the web. All right, let's take a couple from the web then. We have from Brendan Lazar. Where'd that go, Joe? Joe's testing me. In the DEP's opinion, why has the application of TI been rare in New Jersey? That's a good question.
The short and easy part of it is we really haven't had a process so far that actually called it TI. In reality, there have been plenty of sites that haven't been able to achieve groundwater standards for the reason there isn't a technology available or the site conditions don't allow it to happen. This is a way to get them on the books and in a permit process in a documented sense. So we will now have a TI determination in the record saying that we know where we are, we know where we're going, or in this case where we're not going, and we are expecting you to reevaluate it over time until the site can be resolved.
Okay, one from Michael Carnasi, I think it is. Much has been said about system optimization, assuming some type of pumping or injection is involved. What if the site has moved beyond pumping to source treatment via bio or chemox methods? I think it still applies. But
It still applies. Any optimization is a site-specific process. It's not technology-specific.
right, and I think, again, the whole optimization issue is that you have to prove that the technology that is available cannot work, not the fact that you're using it appropriately, but that it doesn't have the ability to solve the problem.
Right, and part of that process is to show that you've actually deployed it as designed, that you've actually operated it as designed, and it's still not working.
Okay. This one is actually was sent in from an email. It says, I'm uncertain about the finality of a TI determination, for lack of a better term. NJDEP will review the TI proposal information. So is the issuance of the RAP by the department and acceptance of the TI determination by the LSRP, pretty much.
Yeah, that's where it's documented. I mean, we will get a look at it, through the submittal process, and then the conditions that you are identifying for the monitoring program will be documented in the remedial action permit through the monitoring schedule. And, through the biennial certification process, you're going to come back in and make sure everything is protective.
Okay, let's take another one. This says, does formal statistical testing need to be employed to demonstrate that chemical concentrations have become asymptotic, or will qualitative methods be acceptable?
There's a wide range of approaches to evaluating that topic. Take a look at the guidance. EPA spends a lot of time on that. I would look at the EPA's Clue-In website. There's numerous ways to evaluate on that site.
Okay, it's actually a good one from David Russell. It says, can an RAO be issued with a confirmed TI at the site?
Yeah, you're going to have a RAO with conditions in the end. You're going to have a permit that's going to go forward, and as you go forward, you're going to be reevaluating, and then you may come in and modify. That is the end game. Hopefully, we'll have a clean site in the end, but this sets up a framework where you can move forward.
Right, and they'll have engineering and institutional controls, and it'll all be rolled into the permit that will be in effect after an RAO is issued.
Right.
Okay, one more from Robert Spiegel. It says, how does the TI approval process change when you have a major receptor or human health impacts like the 450 homes in Pompton Lakes where the responsible party, DuPont, continues to fail in the groundwater cleanup and refuses to buy out or clean up homes of the 450 homes in the community? Can a TA, I'm assuming that's TI, issues be major health issues with major human health and ecological receptors?
I'm not going to get into a specific example given there, but the threshold criteria, as we pointed out for the TI, is protectiveness of human health and environment. You have to show you have that before you're going to come in with a TI determination. So that is the short and sweet answer to that.
Well, I think if there's human health impacts, you have to, whatever you need to do to prevent that or to address it.
You're addressing the receptors, human or ecological.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? Question from Bill is, are RECRA sites non-applicable to TI waivers? Well, RECRA sites are applicable to US EPA involvement, correct?
Yeah, they're EPA lead site. Depending on the source, I mean, if it is a fund lead site, guess where they're going to come? They're going to come here, and then we'll be managing them. But if they're not, they're still within the EPA process, not ours.
All right, let's get you one more from Jennifer Kruger, who has left. Does the department intend for TI to be used to replace the situation of a groundwater remedy with non-decreasing levels of contamination under a natural attenuation remedial action permit, assuming all the other conditions for non-decreasing levels are met? That's a good question. That sounds like it's reached an asymptotic relationship. Is that what that is addressing?
If you're still within the bounds of the M&A process, then no, it's not really TI, but it sounds like you're saying that you're in that situation that we used as an example before, where you're really not progressing, and there is in fact no evidence of progression in the lowering of the contaminant load. So yeah, maybe you may end up with a TI determination in the long haul. You come out of M&A and into TI.
Okay, we have looks like a non-technical comment here from Robert Spiegel. It says, nothing so far in the LSRP program has worked as promised, especially the recent extension of the statutory timeline for the remedial investigation. Bill Wolf is right on target, and this process has been closed to the general public, especially community impacted the most, like the 450 homes in Pompton Lakes. Isn't this permit process just another money-making scheme like all the other permits the NJDEP issues for this program? That's an interesting comment, Bill. There's a fan of yours, obviously, but I would have to say I don't think that is the case. I think this is the department trying to provide some guidance for a process that has occurred for over 25 years now. So that's the intent of the guidance process, is to allow the LSRPs to make better decisions. Barry, do you have a comment on that?
Actually, no, I have a comment on the previous question.
That's a pretty fun question, though. No comment on that?
Yeah, I know.
All right, go ahead.
Relative to the other question, it was a good comment, and it probably needs to be evaluated as to whether or not that process should be rolled into the TI realm.
You're thinking the M&A question?
Yeah. Because it is quite similar in the sense that you've taken it to the point where you're not getting any better, so it may actually be a TI.
Right.
The only thing that I would add to that, just from a groundwater perspective, is if you picked an M&A remedy, and the remedy actually, due to geochemical conditions, has changed, there are other available remedies that may get you to a certain point. Right. So it's not just the fact that M&A isn't working. You have to prove that nothing else will work as well.
Correct. So it is quite similar to the whole TI concept.
Agreed.
But the underlying thing is, if you're still operating within one of those mechanisms like M&A, and you're following the plan and it's progressing, albeit slowly, you're still in that process. You're not TI, but if it's no longer progressing, you may do a TI determination for that portion of that cleanup.
I think that is Roger Ferguson's other question. Did we get to that already? Let's talk about long-term pumping. I think we got both of those because they were similar.
Yeah, similar.
And first one is how many TI determinations have been granted to date? Yeah, I think we're done. We got them all. Any other questions within the audience?
We got one more here.
One.
Yeah, just in the process of developing this guidance, or maybe in external to that, are you aware of anyone that's looked at for, let's say, a complex site with fractured rock, heterogeneous bedrock, and significant denapple? How many sites, even in the nation, have actually been restored without rebound, which have undergone enough monitoring to actually say that?
I'm not sure. I'd look at the EPA data on that myself. I mean, the EPA's does regular reviews of groundwater systems, particularly groundwater pump and treat. So I don't have New Jersey data, but I would look at the EPA for some national data.
Okay. All right. Well, I'd like to thank Tom and for leading the team. Did an excellent job. So thank you, Tom and Ted, for the presentation.
Thank you, Ted.
Thank you, guys. And again, thank you for everyone who made it. Luckily, we didn't have any snow or freezing rain this morning, hopefully, and everyone got here safely. And thank you to the webinar audience. And that will conclude today's presentation. Thank you.